Can you tell me about why you came to the Church of the Servant? Okay, basically that's going to be it. Then I'll probably ask a question like, tell me about Clem. Okay, something like it'll be something simple. We won't go. I think 15 to 20 minutes is probably what we're going to do.
Okay.
So Rose, you will probably take 15 minutes of that probably.
Yeah, and I'll get 5.
All right, if you would just introduce yourselves and tell me who you are.
I'm John Bauerlein.
And I'm the lucky Mrs. John Bauerlein, better known as Rose.
All right. Now, you all have been involved with the Church of the Servant from the very beginning. Can you tell me how come it is you joined the church?
You want to answer that, or you want
Well,
me?
I know from myself. We had gone to church all our lives, and when we moved to Wilmington, we didn't know anybody. We didn't know any churches. We didn't know anything. So we started visiting, or more or less, I started visiting a couple of Presbyterian churches, and we just really weren't happy about it. And then our next door neighbor, she said, I told her we were looking at church, and she said, well, she was a lifelong Episcopalian and that she was going to St. John's.
No, she was St. James.
I mean St. James,
Yeah.
but they were planning, the diocese was planning on building a new mission church. So we went to the first planning meeting. Once that, their original committee came together, and then the first open meeting they had, we went to. And we fell in love with the people and with Clem, our rector, who was, I'll let John give his opening, and then we'll be glad to talk about Clem.
Yeah, what she said. We were standing out in the yard one afternoon, and over the fence, Gay Shook, our next door neighbor, said she had been neighbors with Clem and had known him from St. James. He was the assistant rector there. And what had happened was that Bishop Wright had commissioned a study to look to see where in the diocese new churches need to be formed. One of which was in Wilmington on our site where we are now, for several reasons. One, it was projected to be the centroid of the population of Wilmington. It was also close to the college, and they wanted to attract both students and faculty. And also the Keenans had donated the land that we now, where the Church of the Servant sits. So we went to the first meeting, and I remember when Gay said something about they're going to start a new church, her husband, Ron, says, well, they'll probably do something religion like beg for money. So that was, we ended up going to the first meeting and have been there ever since.
Good. Well, thank you. And tell me a little bit about this Clem.
You want to go, Rose?
Sure. We had no idea what to expect. So we went in, and this very handsome young guy came out with his little magic markers and all the, getting ready to get us started. And he had an energy that was contagious, and he had a softness to him, but he was so funny. And he not only was a wonderful preacher, but he was a friend, and he was very close to all the parish members. He knew everybody. He knew their children. He called us, we had little pet names when we were very small, that is, small congregation. We worked together on everything, but he really did introduce us to a new type of spiritual growth. And I think it was striking in that he could, even though he did it in a casual way and didn't always follow all the rules, he did it in a most loving way. And he also taught us a lot about group process work, and that's how we got started with so much of the church was in small groups that he instigated. And he also believed in sharing the ministry, that each of us had a part of that ministry, and we were responsible for it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. His concept of shared leadership, when he started drawing diagrams, he drew the priest at the center, but with spokes radiating out from it with each of what we called task forces. We didn't want to call it committees. There was a big reason for calling it task force rather than committees, and that was committees seem to have a life of their own, and they take on and are in perpetuity. And we felt like that if we called them task forces, as soon as the task got done, we could assess whether that task still needed to be done or whether it needed to be continued. We didn't want to just automatically assume that once a group was formed that it always had to be that way and always had to stay, and then search for a reason for its existence rather than having an existence that needed to be there. And so that was another one of Clem's and us as a group. We decided, yeah, we liked that idea. We did not want the church to be defined by the priest. We wanted it to be defined by the people, and the missions that were defined by the task forces coordinated by the priest. And we were very small, and so that's how we got to know everybody. It was just really it was more of a community but with a spiritual background. As Rose said, Clem didn't always go by all the rules, and as a matter of fact, for the first few years, we only had on Sunday morning, we didn't have communion. We had morning prayer and only had communion once a week. And but his sermons were always absolutely on point. They were some of the most spiritual sermons I've ever heard, well written, well delivered, and he taught me how to preach. I asked Clem, could I do it? And he said yes. And in fact, he encouraged me, and that's how I learned how to do it. And then when he left, Joe Cooper came in, and he brought in a little bit more of the structure of the Episcopal Church, and we started having communion every week. But it was not our initial idea of the church. We just wanted to be together. In fact, some of the people that were in the first part of the church, as we became more started using more of the Episcopal liturgy, some of them left because they did not want that. They were there for the community and not for the liturgy. And somehow or another we've survived as to having both. And I really like both. One of the funniest things was that Clem was searching for a class, I can't think of the word now, where you're confirmed, a confirmation class. And he grabbed me and he said, John, you and Rose need to be part of this first confirmation class. And I said, Clem, what does that mean? I'm still here. I'm not going to go anywhere. He said, yeah, and he started rattling off all kinds of stuff. I said, okay, I'll do it. Not knowing we didn't have a confirmation class, we just had a confirmation ceremony. And it was nice. It was me and Rose and the Weller twins and Paul Brissett. Those were the first communions in the Church of the Servant.
Okay, well, good. Tell me a little bit about the attraction of the Christian Ed, which was, I understand, the St. Louis education program.
Well, I think Christian Ed, if you look, I wish we could look at all of those newsprints that we generated, and we must have generated tons of newsprint. But there was a big emphasis on Christian education, and we looked for curriculums in the other parishes, and some of them provided us some of their books and stuff, but it didn't feel like us. It did not feel like what we were doing, and I was in Christian education for the first 25 years of the church, so I can understand how I felt. And Clem knew about the educational center in St. Louis, and they were having a conference at Shrinemont in Virginia, and where Chandler Brown was leading a course introducing people to the Ed Center. She was the director at the time. And Clem and Gay Shook and Jenny Lundeen drove up to Shrinemont. Now, the funny story around that is Clem got the date wrong. And they drove up to Shrinemont, which is as far as west you can go in Virginia before you get to West Virginia. And they drove up in the middle of the night, and the place was dark, just pitch dark. And they were a day early. So then they had to go find a place to stay for the night. But they came back, and they introduced us, said, you're going to enjoy this Christian education. And they told us about it, but we didn't really understand it until Clem persuaded Chink to come to Wilmington. We met at Frances Thornton's house on the beach, and she trained us into how to do Christian education through the St. Louis Ed method. And that's actually how I met Joe Cooper, because he was in my small group at the time. So I became enthralled with it and used it for the rest of the time that I taught Christian education at Church of the Servant. And as I said in my little reflection for the tagline, I never considered myself a teacher. I always considered myself a facilitator to help whoever it was, adults or teenagers or young children, to help them discover what they already knew.
Joe Cooper came in 1982. Can you tell me a little bit about Joe?
Well, John had gotten to know Joe a little bit personally before I met him, and it really was a change for us to get used to having the correct liturgy to go with whatever you were preaching about, and also the difference between Clem and Joe. You wouldn't want to compare them because they were so different, but they were both so excellent and starting you on your spiritual journey or knowing how to push you further in your spiritual journey and providing the tools to do that. But we liked him very much. He also was a very social creature, and he would fix a meal for church at the drop of a hat. He loved to cook, and he loved the youth. He was always doing something with them. He had a young daughter himself, he and his wife, and they were really a good team, and introduced us to the St. Louis Ed method was wonderful. Going to conferences, interacting with other churches. He really made that possible for us to branch out and not just think of ourselves as a little small mission, but we were accepted, and we were sort of beginning to get a reputation as being a very open church, very accepting of most anything, and we got our wrists popped once or twice, but it was a great experience.
Yeah, as I say, I met Joe at that conference for the Ed Center, and he was in Murfreesboro at that time, and then he moved to St. Paul's and Define in Fayetteville. And one time he called me up and asked me if I would come up and do Christian education training in the St. Louis Ed Method for his people as they started up in the fall. And I drove up there, and there's a story around that. Ray, his wife, and Coleman had gone on a canoe trip, and there was a former Church of the Servant member who was a member of St. Paul's in the Pine. And after we got through on Saturday night, I was staying with Joe, just the two of us, because they were gone, his family was gone. And I didn't know how to get to the house, and so I was driven to the house by Barbara, and we got there. Joe had to stay and get set up for Sunday morning. And we got in there, and the house was dark, and his little dog was running around. And we called him, and that was in the days before cell phones, and he told us, well, the fuse box is behind the refrigerator. Well, Barbara grabbed a candle, and above his refrigerator, Joe had been decorated with eucalyptus leaves, and somehow the candle got close to the eucalyptus, and all of a sudden the fire, they caught fire, and so you can imagine the panic on our end, and Joe was at a loss as to what was happening, but we were able to put out the fire, and I don't think we ever found a fuse, but we put a penny in it and it worked. But that was the first time that I ever did a sermon outside Church of the Servant. Joe said he would like for me to preach on Sunday. So I did that, and I did it again the next year. He invited me back to do another Christian education, and I preached up there too.
Well, our time is about up, and we appreciate all your insights. I do have one more question, and that is for Rose. Rose, can you tell us how to spell farm?
Well, I think it's F-A-R-M. Farm?
Or E-I, E-I-O.
Please spell farm. And now when he laughed, he said, you are dumb, you are so dumb, you don't know how to spell farm. It's E-I-E-I-O.
Okay, you'll have to watch another video to see that. Okay, thank you, folks.
That's right.
We appreciate your help and everything you've done with Church of the Servant.
Well, thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Ron. You've done a lot for this 50th anniversary. I can't believe it, all the time you put in. Thank you so much.